Hi, I'm JD and welcome to my channel. If you need to reach me and ask me some questions, uh, mail me at jdwatchservice@gmail.com. It's right up there in the top, jdwatchservice@gmail.com. I do watches, repair watches, but I've been pretty busy with work lately, so I likely will only do watches that come from Canada because it makes it a lot simpler for me, and I don't have to deal with the border services and stuff like that because it's a bit tricky getting across the border and convincing them that you're repairing a watch and not buying it, and then they charge you import fees for buying the watch, which is real PIA if you know what that means. But within Canada, it's pretty good. It's not an issue. You just mail it back and forth, and there's no problem there. So I've taken on a couple of Canadian watches. I just delivered one to Max recently, and he had a jewel replacement, and it was a bit tricky because I had to modify the jewel setting to lower it because it had a end shake issue. So it was too much end shake. So I had to get that jewel a little closer in, which means I had to modify the major diameter of that rim and the thickness of it. I just had to take some material off that thickness so that it would ride in a little closer. And it was a lower jewel that was cracked. Oh, the heck! Like really cracked. So not just a partial crack. Sometimes when I look at a jewel and I see that it's cracked, you look at it and you say, okay, it's cracked right up to the hole. If you're looking at it like a donut, it's got a crack right up to the hole, and the watch is still working really well. But you know that crack will take that hole, the hole for the jewel, and it slightly shifts it, right? So even though that the crack might not be on both sides, it'll shift it just a bit, and that shifting of that crack will cause that pivot as it's spinning in that inside the jewel hole to wear, right? Because it'll wear where that crack is. So that diamond is very hard. So, or not diamond, ruby, I guess. So the ruby is very very hard. So that ruby will wear out that steel pivot, right? So the steel is tempered. It's very hard, but it's not. It's been burnished and it's hardened, so it'll run smooth. But that little crack could cause the issue. So I usually replace those with a new jewel. Even though the watch might be functioning perfectly and you don't think there's any issues, it will become an issue, and the next impact on that watch of any type usually shatters that jewel or causes a crack on the other side. And it might just be caused that way because of the pressure of the pivot on the side. So, and when a pivot runs inside of a jewel hole, it's not running dead center of that jewel hole. So that's side shake. So if I look at the jewel hole as a circle, and that's the pivot in the middle. I apologize for my diagram right now because you're probably saying, okay, let's rate this video. So anyway, there's the jewel hole, the pivot going through the jewel hole. Side shake is this way here, but you've got power coming from the the mainspring, right, running through the all of the wheels until it gets to the escapement, and then the pallet fork, and then the actual balance staff, or the balance rather. So that all those pivots are actually wanting to lean on one side of that jewel hole as they put pressure on it. So they're not dead center. They're not the wheel jewels within a jewel hole are not in dead center because the pressure is from all the gears pushing it to one side of that jewel hole all the time. So that one side of the jewel hole will have more pressure within that jewel than this side here. So sometimes you see cracks on one side, and that's because of the force exerted by that pivot on that jewel itself is actually on one side of that jewel. And people can write me and say I'm full of it, but think about it. When you have all the pressure from the actual mainspring barrel, right, and it's going to the center wheel, and it's pushing that center wheel, causing it to be leaning on one side of that jewel hole, which is pushing the next wheel, right, the third wheel, causing it to be leaning on the jewel hole, and it goes all the way down through the train of wheels, right? So it's actually leaning on one side, right? So this is why you get cracks in the jewel sometimes, because it's not just in the center. Now, when it gets to the escapement actually, or the balance in the watch with the balance staff in the middle and the jewel hole in the middle, it swings back and forth, and if you look at that balance, that pivot tends to ride on all ends or edges of the whole of that jewel. So reasons for a jewel cracking might be force over time, or it may be impact. But when you see see a wheel that's like the third wheel or something like that, or the fourth wheel, and a crack on there, it might just be the constant pressure from the mainspring barrel through the train causing that to weaken over time, right? So these things are 150 years old sometimes. So for a jewel to take that stress for that many, 28,800, or actually for this watch, there are 18,000 beats per hour, right? So you take 18,000 beats per hour and you multiply it by a full year of hours, you're getting millions and millions of beats, right? So you're getting millions and millions of constant pressure on that particular jewel hole. So I'm yapping away. So today, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be working on Bori's watch, and I'm going to be fixing that end shake on his watch. Now, I've tried a couple techniques now to put the shellac on the end of a brass rod. So that's fine. I've got that. I'm going to put that into a bench block and then melt the shellac on the rod. Then put the rod into the lathe, right? And then I'll have then once I've actually put the shellac on the rod, melt the shellac on the rod, stick the jewel setting on top of that, so it's all lined up straight like this, right? And it's not going to be in the center. So you've seen in the past 2 videos me with the technique of centering it, right? So, but I was doing this by hand. So I thought, you know what? I have a collet holding tailstock. So what I'm going to do is take the same needle I had this needle I was using. So I took a sewing needle, and I took the back end of the sewing needle, not the front that's sharp, the back end, which is a lot wider, right? Which will just kind of rub against the overall inside of that jewel setting, as opposed to sticking it through the hole of the actual jewel, which could damage the jewel itself. So this would rub on the edge. So I'm going to try taking this here, putting it in a collet in the tailstock, and then I'm going to take the brass rod that's got the brass rod, and it's got the shellac, and then it's got the jewel setting attached. Then I will heat that brass rod up again to loosen that shellac, and then move this with the collet holding tailstock in there, and move this up to that setting to make sure that to try to center that jewel setting without doing it by hand. So this is going to be absolutely centered, right? So there's no issue at all. So I'll try that. I'm going to try it with the needle first, and then I'm going to try it with a piece of pegwood. Let me reach over some pegwood. And I'm going to try it with a piece of pegwood that's sharpened a bit. This might also work well, but I can't guarantee that the point on the pegwood will be completely centered. So that could be an issue. So I'm going to see what happens there. I could shave off the pegwood in the lathe as well, so I know it's centered and rounded, and then use that to push the jewel, which is a little safer than using this to push the jewel setting. But I'm using old jewel settings that I'm not really concerned with to do this job. So this watch you're looking at on the side has absolutely nothing to do with today's video, nothing. But I just put that in there because it's an Omega watch, and it says Sault Ste. Marie, Canada on it. It was owned by a lady who provided me a couple of her grandfather's watches for some service work I did. This watch needs cleaning, so if I've got time today, I also want to strip this watch down and put it in my new cleaning machine and run it in the cleaning machine and reassemble it. But I'm going to test it first, see how well it runs, and then do all of that, service the watch, put it back together, and then see how well it runs, and see if there's a significant improvement in its performance after I've done the cleaning and oiling and everything else. Just to test it all, right? And I'll try to take videos of the whole process so you can see how that whole process takes place. So, and this is quite a nice old watch too. The thickness of that glass on the top is incredible. And this watch, I did clean the crystal. It was all scratched and everything, but I had another video I made about how to clean a watch crystal, and I used that to clean the watch crystal. And the back is, I polished the back, even though I haven't really polished it up in a while. But if you look at, if I just do this with a rag here, I think there's a little mark here from sitting on the table. But if I just do this with a rag, man, not too bad. It polishes up nicely. There's some scuffs here I could easily get rid of if I wanted to, but I'm just going to scuff it up again anyway. So this is the watch running. It's an Omega watch. Let me just take the back off for you, just for the heck of it. The video is probably already too long. Anyway, so there it is there. I wound it up a few times, and I'll measure the actual amplitude of this watch and the beat error and see if there's anything I can do to improve its performance. It runs pretty well though. And if you just flip this around, it's not a high jouled watch, so it's 7 joules, and it is an Omega. So it's probably worth something because it's Omega. And I just noticed there's a screw missing here, so I'll replace this this case screw as well. So it's good. I haven't done anything with this yet. Nothing. Zero. Absolute zero. So anyway, Max, your watch is in the mail. I think I sent you the tracking number for it, and I shipped it with they said 3-day shipping, so, but I'm not sure if they include the weekend when they say 3-day shipping, because they get away with stuff like that. But it was shipped on Friday with insurance and shipping. This is what I typically do, so people feel comfortable they're going to get their product back. And so I hope you enjoy the watch, Max. It was running supremely well when I tested it, and I think I showed the testing on that. And if you have any issues, just let me know. So that's it. Let's get on with setting the lathe up and doing this crazy work on this jewel. So I'm going to do the jewel practice. All that stuff is in this video. How to center it using a lathe as opposed to doing it by hand and all that. Then I'm going to attack Bori's watch, because I'm doing this for training and technique before I actually take Bori's watch, take that jewel out, stick it on the end of that brass rod, and then center it, and then trim off just a bit of material from that setting to drop it down just a bit. And I'm talking like the thing needs to go down probably 0.1 millimeters, maybe 0.09 millimeters, maybe 0.08. Really small. So it's going to be a take the material off and test kind of job. So anyway, thanks for watching my video. Let's get on with the work here. All right, before I start, we're going to have a quick watch check here. So this is a San Martin, and it looks a hell of a lot like a Tudor. Anyway, beautiful watch, and a gorgeous movement on there, or good movement on there. A PT 5000 movement made in China, and so that's an ETA clone movement, but it's superb. 120 clicks on the bezel. This baby looks great. So anyway, that's my watch for the watch check. So let's get on with this video. So here's my setup here. So here's the brass rod that would go on. It goes into the lathe, into the headstock of the lathe. I fit a hole, found the exact right hole to fit this in. So here's the test jewel setting. Now I would recommend that you dip that jewel setting in alcohol and then let it dry out, so it won't have any issues at all. That it won't have any dirt on there that would prevent it from sticking. So I didn't do that because I'm just doing a test, so it should have enough metal on here to adhere, and I'm just kind of rolling it onto this Rodico here to take out any hair or anything that would be there that I don't want. So that might just do for this, but this is again just a test. So what I'll end up doing is taking this jewel setting after I melt the shellac on there, and it's resting on here on the shellac. So that's the tricky part. So I'll lower my chair here, because there's my t-shirt. What does it say here? Let's just go down here. Dads, I tell, I don't even know how to do this. I tell Dad, and it says jokes. You see those chemicals there? 42 jokes periodically. Oh my God, that's funny. Anyway, let's move on with this stuff before you guys get bored shitless. Can I say that on YouTube? So first I'm going to get this nice gun here, and this is a quick heat gun. I don't need to have a special tip. I just need to get that thing hot fast. So, and I want to take the jewel off here for now. So maybe there's a better way of putting the jewel on top of the setting, but this is my current technique. So I'll take a piece of shellac and just stick it on. So you want to have a lot of shellac on there, by the way. I tried it in other ways and it just didn't work. I'm going to hold this in place so I don't push this off, and I want to get positive contact. So when I turn this on, the light shows up, and this little puppy dog gets hot pretty fast. So I'm going to let it get hot for a few seconds before I touch this. So, and then I'll just put some pressure on this here, and I can ride it up pretty close to the tip here, just so the heat transfers onto the shellac and then melts the shellac down onto the end of that rod. So I'm doing that right now. I'm just moving it a bit back and forth so I make sure I've got good contact there. And there's some smoke coming from the soldering iron. And like I said, this is a pretty good soldering iron. It heats up really fast. I got it for free. My wife picked it up on Facebook free. So there's the shellac melting away, right? And after this sort of melts, it should blob over. I'm going to grab my tweezers while this thing is hot and just stick this right on top of that. So I'm waiting for it to just kind of get even looser. And I'll just stick this setting right on top. And it'll smush down. Smush, that's sort of not really technical, but so put it down like that. And then I'm going to press down on this. And that's smushed down. There we go. So that's in place now. And then I take the heat off of it and let it cool. So that's about as centered as I wanted to get it for this. And then what I'll do next, I'll let this cool for a few seconds. It doesn't take long for this to cool off, by the way. Then I'll take this out and I'm going to put it into the lathe, right? I'm going to put it into the collet on the lathe and then go from there. All right, there's the jewel sitting on top. I'm not sure how successful this will be because the jewel's actually kind of going sideways a bit here. So this will be a real test of whether this can center properly because it's obviously not centered here. I probably could have done a better job heating this up and centering it after I heated it up. So we'll go with that anyway. All right, now I'm going to pick the collet for this needle. So I've got a needle on the end here they said I was going to use. I'm giving you the complete process here, by the way. So there's the needle, and it's kind of rounded on the end, which is perfect. I got to pick a collet here that would be perfect for this needle. So I just move this over on the end, and it's not that big, so I just have to dip this needle into the various collets here to see which one fits it best. I want this to grab it and leave probably about a couple of, like, probably half an inch on the end. So I don't want to. I could say that in centimeters, but so that's not too bad there. And that's a number 6. That's an 8. This one's too tight. So that's a 5 or an 8. No, it's an 8, a 7, and this is a 9. So I think it might end up being a 9, although a 9 looks like it's a little bit loose. Sometimes these things aren't as consistent in measurement as you want them to be. Because a 7 actually looks like it fits perfectly. So I'm going to use a 7. So I stuck that on into the 7. That's going to go into the tailstock. Alright, here's my collet holding tailstock. So I've got my rod here, and that goes in the back here. And this holds the collet on the other end here. So, and this has also got a micrometer on the end, which you would use if you had to basically move this up and down. So what you do is you move the micrometer, and then this stops on the end. So you're adjusting this so it has a stop. So if you set this at 0 and you're snug up against it, as you move this micrometer over, it allows you to push it further in. So if I go this way, for example, you're allowed to push it further in, and that's how the micrometer works on a tailstock. So I don't think I'll need this because I think I'll just use my hand to push it back and forth to adjust the end. So here we go. So that's that. I put this collet in here. You rotate it until it lines up. There you go. Because there's a little tiny jobby doohickey knobby on the inside there that catches, and then this is threaded on the end, and it'll grab that collet and then pull it in. And when it pulls it in, it straightens up whatever it's grabbing. So if I pull that in like that, and I just turn this like this, right, it's pulling that in. I should just turn this way so you can see what's going on here. So I'm just doing this, and that will pull the collet in. Hopefully it will. There we go. So the collet is being pulled in right now. And if I want to tighten that, so that's pretty good there. Just rotate that a bit to make sure it's centered. It looks pretty good. And to tighten it properly, I need to tighten the top here, which grabs this bar and allows me to tighten the collet. So now I don't need that tightened a lot, right? It's just holding the needle that's going to be used for centering. So now I loosen that up again, and that allows me to draw the bar back and forth, right, for centering. So now this is set up. I just have to put it on the lathe. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a back view as I put this together. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my tailstock in and see if I can snug that up here. Sometimes it's tricky to get that tailstock in because it wants to doesn't want to get into the grooves. So it's got the bottom piece that needs to fit in. There we go. So there the tailstock is in place, as you can see, and I want to snug that up with the piece that's going to go inside of here, but I've got to tighten my tailstock up. So I'm going to just adjust the camera live. Okay, this is a live adjustment. Also going to move the whole lathe over a bit to give me more flexibility with the camera, so you can see, look straight down at my periodic t-shirt, and I can zoom in just a bit like that. Okay, so there we go. So there's the situation there. See, periodically, and there's the watch. Beautiful watch, beautiful watch. So I should shine that up. So in this case here, I'm not using the tip over tool rest at all. So just make sure that's out of the way. And I want to get this close enough to do the job. So first what I'll do is I'm going to take this brass rod with the setting on the end, and I'm going to stick that into the lathe, and I'm going to leave enough room here so I can put the soldering iron to heat this up, and I'll tighten that up like that, and then spin it, see if that's good. Yeah, I did a shitty job centering this thing, as you can see, really shitty job. So we'll see if this corrects it. If it doesn't, I'll have to reapply the shellac. So I want to pull this back a bit in my tailstock, and then move the whole tailstock forward. You can see the edge of it right here, but move it forward and then tighten it, right? Because you want to be a bit close so your tolerances are perfect, right? So in this case here, my thought is that when I touch the end of this jewel, it's going to try to center this when this is heated up, right? So, or the jewel setting. So that's my plan A. Okay, there's no plan B involved here. And if I do that and it keeps it centered perfectly as I spin this, right, which it should do, right, because it's not, I'm not doing it by hand this time. So then I apply the heat with the soldering iron. There's my soldering iron here. It's a nice little soldering iron, by the way. It's a soldering iron gun LR88370 from Pemco. Good old Pemco. Who the heck are Pemco? Anyway, and it's got a little light on the end, so you turn that on, the light goes on. So I got to make sure I don't touch the soldering iron on anything but this brass rod, because it'll melt my belts on my lathe. Alright, here we go. I'm going to heat this up now. So I'm going to apply a little bit of heat to the soldering iron and wait till I see a little bit of smoke on the end there, because I'll know that it's working when I see the smoke. And I'm hoping and praying that this works to center this nicely. So it's that's the trick. If it doesn't, I just have to take this off. So what I'm going to do is, I'll move this forward just enough to keep this in place. So if I don't, just to keep the jewel setting in place, so it doesn't want to go anywhere. Now this is not really well centered at all. So I probably should center it a bit before I actually put this in. So I'm not sure if I can do that when I heat this up, because I kind of screwed this up a bit. So I'm going to just touch this like this, and I'm just going to pull it over just a bit with my little toothpick here. There we go. So I pull that over, and now this is more or less centered. So when I touch this here, if I roll this around, and I need to heat it up enough for that shellac to loosen up though. That's perfect. So you see how that centered that? Thing of beauty. Hopefully the camera was focused on that. So basically, just in case you didn't get it focused or not, when I touch that on the end, like this, and I touch the soldering iron here, it loosened up the shellac enough for this thing to center perfectly, right? And using the tailstock. And so now when I spin it, it's pretty much centered. You know what? It's not perfectly centered. So I'm going to do this a little bit more because I can see it going up and down here. It might be the fatness of my... You know what? I think what happens is it sags down, so you got to make sure you leave the needle in there long enough so that it doesn't sag down. So let me just touch this again and spin this. Now leave it there. So last time I took it out, and then the jewel slid down on the post just a bit. So leave the needle in place to keep that jewel pressed against the end of that. Now I'm not sure. Like, I think that if you put too much heat, then the shellac will kind of move out of the gap, and then it won't hold on to that jewel setting enough. So I could have that problem by doing this again and again and again. But what I've just found is that if you leave the needle in place, then the jewel won't sag down because it's got weight on it, and if the shellac is still hot at all, this will just allow it to go down. So now I'm going to see what this thing looks like as I spin it to see if it's perfectly in perfect situation. I'm going to put my finger on there. It's a black mark, worker's mark. So there we go. So now I'm going to pull this out and then spin it. Yeah, that's not too bad. It's fairly centered. A little bit of rotation still, right? Yeah, you can see the thing just rotating a bit, like wobbling. You can see the needle wobbling, but it wasn't wobbling before. So now I got to heat this bugger up again, try it again, and make sure it doesn't wobble this time. I'm not sure why it's wobbling, but it was. If I do this and I just apply the heat while it's spinning, and eventually the wobble goes away because it's there, no wobble now. Now what I'm going to do is just keep spinning it as it cools. More technique, folks. So just keep spinning it as it cools. Now it's cooling down, but it's spinning as well. So now, assuming that that's staying in place, if I take the needle back now, because it should be cooled off by now, I remove the needle. There, now it's perfect. There we go. So leave the needle in there, I take the soldering iron heat away from it, and then spin it after. So I just put my finger so you can see it better. So there you go. So that's a much better job. So now that's in there nicely. Now I should be able to grave that with my graver. So if I take my tip over tool rest here, the tip over tool rest, and I've got a graver available here, and I'm just going to get in here close and see what I can do here. Let me just zoom in here so you can see what's happening. So there it is. There's the jewel, and if I spin that, you'll see it's pretty good. It might, if I could find a piece of metal that's pretty good. If you look at that, that's spinning pretty true. So now the question is there enough shellac on there to hold it in place while I remove material from the edge here? So if I just put my graver in here like that, right, will it take material off? That's the question. So spin this a bit. Oh, see, there's the problem there. So as I explained, if you look at the tip here, because I had heated this up a number of times, the shellac basically went out of that flat part and went on the edge, and now I didn't have any shellac at all to actually grab that jewel setting. So what I'm going to try, I'm just going to remove a little bit of shellac here. Just get rid of the shellac on the end here. And I'm also going to just face off the part here and get rid of the shellac that was on the end here. So I'm just facing this off just a bit. Now it's pretty much shellacless. There's a lack of shellac. Alright, so there we go. So there's no shellac on this at all. So I'm going to take the same jewel setting here and make sure there's no shellac on the jewel setting. Here it is here. So it doesn't look like there's any shellac on there at all. But I think what I'll do is dip that in isopropyl alcohol to get rid of any shellac that might be there. Take this out and then stick this back on with shellac and try that, because I think the centering process was perfect. So I'll be back in a second. So I've got myself a little bit of isopropyl alcohol that I put into a cap, and I'm going to throw this jewel setting in here, right, and let that sit in that for a few minutes, because it should get rid of the shellac, because that isopropyl alcohol and the shellac don't really like each other. So I'm just going to do that and then move that setting around and move it around. And then I've got to take it out and just dry it. I'll put it on a piece of watch paper and then let that dry. And then from there, I will be able to, let me just zoom in here a little bit so you can see the jewel on the bottom there. And it's the isopropyl alcohol with the jewel on the bottom. And and I've set that more shellac on the end of that post. I'm not worried about that post because I faced it off, so I shouldn't have to worry about that. So there's the jewel setting. I'm just going to throw that onto a piece of watch paper. There we go. And get rid of the isopropyl alcohol, move that out of the way, because that is flammable, so you got to keep that out of the way. So then here's my jewel setting, and I'll have a close look at that setting after too. And then after I've cleaned it off, I'm just going to take a very small piece of sandpaper and actually make sure that there's nothing left on this, right? So that'll dry off very quickly. There we go. Let's dry that off. Make sure it's got no liquid left on it, because that has to be completely dried. Like that. And then I'm going to put it down here on my tip over tool rest. And then I'm going to hold it in place with my tweezers and then use a blower and just puff at that a little bit to take away any excess. If you don't hold it down with your tweezers, this thing is going to take a ride. So you'll never find it again. There we go. That's one side. And then take that. This is what you should do actually before you did what I did. So I kind of knew that there might be a problem with it adhering to the post because of the because I didn't. I'm just going to hold it sort of sideways so that I can make sure that the air gets in where the jewel hole is, in case there's any liquid left. But this thing evaporates super fast, and it just flew off. I just saw it fly off. There it is there. Bring it around the back. I don't want to lose it, then I'll have to get another jewel setting. So. Alright, that's good enough for now. Good enough for government work. So that's it there. I do have a really small, I got some sandpaper here. So you want to take a piece of sandpaper perhaps, and then you would take that and just rub that on top of the jewel, which would make it a bit coarse, which would help it to adhere, right? So if I take it like this, and I don't want to, I just want to use my finger on this because it's on the outside, but I don't want to use, there we go, just scrape it just a bit. It's good there, and I'm just using my finger, but it's pressing on the smaller radius of the jewel, not the back where it's going to adhere, right? So that's that there. And I'll put that down here now. I'm just showing you this technique here, and I want a piece of Rodico. This isn't the cleanest Rodico, but it shouldn't matter. Just put that on the Rodico and press it down. That'll get rid of any leftover copper fibers that might be from the sanding. So there, I've got that now, and I just need to take this piece, heat up that rod, and stick it on again. So this is just a quick side shot because I don't want to have to do the close-up here, but what I've done is I've taken the rod here, I put shellac on it, then I put the jewel on the top. So I'm going to see if I can actually make all that happen at the same time, so I don't have to place the jewel on the melted shellac. And I'll see if I can do that. So maybe I'll get a close-up. It's going to be a pain in the butt, but I'll do it anyway. Alright, so there's the jewel sitting on the shellac, sitting on the rod. I don't know if this will work, but I figured I'd show you anyway. Because this is an interesting way of doing it. Because I'm not sure how much shellac will stick to this. So if I take this off and I put the shellac on first, like that, I think I just dropped a chunk of shellac in the middle here, right? So I want to, I'm messing this up here, guys. So again, it's focus. It's not just a shitty car. Just break this piece of shellac off right here. Like that. And I got a piece of shellac right here that I want to grab. And let's move this stuff in camera again, right? There it is, in camera. I'm not sure if this is focused, but I'm going to focus it. There we go. You're getting this live technique. Watch me screw up live. There's one piece of shellac. I want a piece of shellac, and I want the other piece of shellac on top there as well. I'd like to stack it so I don't have shellac on the edges that doesn't really matter, right? So I can break the shellac off. It's pretty breakable, actually. And I can put another piece of shellac on top, like a smaller piece. Let me see if I can put this on top under camera, under the stress of being filmed. Man, this is small. And then I'm going to put the jewel on top of all of this. See how well this works. Ugh! Alright, here I go again. So I found the jewel on the floor. It flinged off. I figured I'd leave that in the video because I can show you stuff that's absolutely successful and you'll be so impressed, but then I'll say, okay, this is what really happened. So that flung off. So I cleaned it off with Rodico a bit on the top. So now I'm going to try stacking this material on top here. I'm not sure how much I actually need, so if I stack one piece of shellac on and then just very carefully grab this, because that's what happened last time. I grabbed it, but there we go. Hold my breath. There we go. I didn't do it very carefully, so I'm going to have a look at this and see if it's at all centered right now. Because if it's kind of off right now, then it's going to be even harder later. So that's not too bad. Now I'm going to apply heat to this, and let's see if this adheres. Alright, I'm going to apply heat to this without burning my hand. So here we go, I got to shut up now. Okay, I just saw it move, so make the assumption that it was melted. So I just looked at the top of this and I saw it move just a bit, so I'm assuming that that melted on. And now I'm going to put it on the lathe and see if I can center it and see if this will work. If it's not, I got to put more shellac on there and do it again, but I won't show you that process. So let's check this out. Alright, I got the shellac, it's on there, and now I'm going to try centering this again and see if that works. So heat it up a bit, turn this on, and then make sure that that needle is sort of sitting there on the jewel, because as this heats up, see how the needle goes around there a bit, and that should, when it softens, that should center that. And the needle won't roll around. Right, that's perfect there. Take the heat off of it, spin it around a bit more. Kind of looks like the jewel is wobbly. Have a look at that again, see if there's, it looks like there's a little wobbling going on there, so I'm going to apply more heat and see if I can get rid of the wobble. Probably not. I'll just start over again. I think the wobble's gone now, but now is there enough shellac to hold that on? If that's not working perfectly, I'm just going to show you the end result because I know it'll stick to it. Just need to, it's trial and error, man, trial and error. So, oh, see, it's wobbling a bit because I didn't hold it in place while I had the heat on it, right? So I should have kept spinning it with the heat on, which would have made sure that that wobbling goes away. So let's try that again, a little bit more heat here, and get rid of that wobble, because that jewel will tend to sag. Alright, the wobble's gone. Now I'm just going to keep spinning it like this as it cools off. This is what I said I'd do last time. So I'm doing that, and hopefully this will not... It's a good indicator when that needle goes around and wobbles that it's not centered. So I don't know if that shellac will actually keep that jewel on for graving. I know it worked before when I did it by hand, so I know it will work. So I just have to hone this technique, and I know a lot of you guys appreciate me just showing you my trial and error here, but this is how it works in watchmaking. So sticking this on is not an easy job. I may have to make the end of this rod more coarse rather than smooth. So that should be cooled down now, right? There we go. Well, theoretically that's stuck on and I should be able to grave it, but I'm not sure. So I'll just let it cool for a few more seconds, move this needle out of the way, and put the tip over tool rest in here now. Hopefully this doesn't pop off like it did last time. Who knows? It might. If it does that, I'm just going to try this a little bit more with a little more shellac on there, and then try to get it affixed there immediately so I got enough shellac left over to grab that jewel setting. Alright, here's my trial, and see if this will actually stay in place. Yeah, it's staying in place. There we go. So that worked. So in this case, I just wanted to remove a little bit of material from the edge, which would allow this setting to go down and deeper and remove my end shake. So I'm just going to actually grave the edge of it. It might fall off right now, but I've done the job of removing material from the end, so which is great. So I'll get rid of the shellac here. And you see how that's stuck on there, and there's actually enough room to actually size this jewel, so this might pop off. We'll see what happens here. If this pops off, it's because I'm putting side pressure on it, but I'm seeing if I can remove a little material from it from this side. It's on good. There you go. So that's it. So that worked. Now I just have to heat this up a bit and remove the setting, and then I'm going to put that in the isopropyl alcohol and get rid of it from there. So let me just heat this up and remove the setting. Alright, we're heating that up right now. And I'm going to remove the setting, and it might fall down, but see what I can do here. It should just shift over a bit and I can grab it. It's on good. Success. Come on. Come to mama. Man, that is on really good. Oh, there we go. It's moving a bit now. There, you can see it moving there. So you can just shift it over like that. Rotate it a bit. This might fling, but I'd probably use Rodico or something to grab it. And that is on really good. There we go. So there's the setting, and it's removed. And I just need to clean that up in isopropyl alcohol. So I'll take the alcohol, and I will, it's in a little tiny cup here, and I'll just throw that in like that. And then that should dissolve the shellac on the bottom, right? There we go there. So that's on the bottom, and that should dissolve that shellac, and I'll check that out after. But here we go. I was able to modify that jewel setting nicely. Stick that on. I learned a few lessons here. The big one being keep that needle like tight in with that piece until it's not spinning anymore. Then remove the soldering iron from it, and then allow it to spin a bit more as it cools down, so it doesn't warble. Warble Redenbacher. There we go. That's it. All right, there you go. What a job. What a job. So I hope you enjoyed this video. So if you've got a lathe and you've got a tailstock on that lathe, as I said earlier, I put a needle on the end of this tailstock. I put my copper rod in here. I fixed the jewel onto the copper rod as I showed you earlier. Really trying to put the shellac on the copper rod and then put the jewel on top of the shellac and then heat it all up. That doesn't work. Don't do that. What I ended up doing was taking the shellac, melting it on the rod, and then putting the jewel setting on there as it was heated up, and then heating it up a bit more and smushing it down onto that rod, and then I let that dry, and then let that cool down, and then I put it on the end of shoved the copper rod into lathe here. It was still not absolutely flat. It was a little bit warped, as you saw, so it wasn't true to flat this way. But when I put this here, I could see the warble go away. And then, as I said before, when you push that on and it centers, then and you're happy, you remove the soldering iron and remove this, that jewel setting is going to sag down on you. I saw that happen twice. So keep this in place and keep rotating this piece on your lathe. So keep spinning this like this on your lathe. Just spin it slowly like that. So you're just barely spinning it. If you look at my counter shaft, as I'm running this, I'm barely spinning this. I'm going like that. I'm not spinning it like all out like that. I'm just spinning it very slowly to allow that the needle to center that jewel on top of that rod. And then once you have that centered and flat, right, you remove the soldering iron, and man, did that ever hold. It was actually hard to take off after I'd done all that. So make sure you clean the parts. You fashion or you finish the end off here. You basically face off, it's called, the end of your metal here, and make sure your jewel is nice and clean. I put it in isopropyl alcohol. I kind of flicked it. It kind of flicked onto the carpet. I took one of my hands and knees, and I found that jewel. Hands and knees, Jerry, hands and knees, and I found the jewel. So that was tough. So, but anyway, that allowed me to get in there now and remove material from that jewel. So I'm able to change the end shake by taking some of that material off the jewel, as I said in the last video. So I'm just going to pop this down because I can't see around it. Anyway, Anyway, thanks for watching my channel. That's it. It's going to be a long video, so this is instead of watching Netflix, instead of watching Disney Channel, instead of watching the Beatles try to figure out how to play Hey Jude, which was actually pretty impressive, by the way. I really enjoyed that. But don't watch that. Watch this. Share this video with other people who are enthusiasts in watchmaking and who want to think way outside the box to solve these problems. This is my technique. I didn't read this in any book at all. I did read about shellacking a setting, I think, on a post. I think I read that in an old book. I did not read about centering it using a tailstock and using the nubby end of a needle, right, which is nice and rounded so it won't ruin your jewel. Didn't read that anywhere, so that's kind of thinking outside the box on how to solve this problem. And I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching my channel again, jdwatchservice@gmail.com, and have a good day and stay safe out there in the world of the wonderful world of pandemic that we live in right now. It'll eventually go away, folks. It'll eventually be like the flu, hopefully.